Innuendo, Book 5 of the Todd Mills Mystery Series. Author R.D. Zimmerman. Publisher Scribble Pub Press, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 6. It took more willpower, more self-control than Rawlings thought he had. He stepped through the front door of the apartment building, continued down the half-flight to the basement, and then just stopped and stood there, leaning against the cool wall with one hand. He put the other to his head. "You've got to get yourself under control. You can't let anyone see. You can't let anyone know." He took a deep breath, then lowered his right hand and studied it, seeing it violently tremble. He grabbed it with his left and clutched it. "Just stop it. That little shit's dead, and there's nothing you can do." Jesus Christ, he thought. Todd hadn't guessed. Had he? He couldn't possibly suspect anything, could he? Already, Todd knew him better than almost anyone. Not simply through the actual time they'd spent together, but through their long hours of conversation, during which Rawlings had divulged more about himself than he ever had to anyone else. It seemed as if he'd told Todd every secret, every fear, every hope, and every lust. Every lust, of course, but one. So had Todd just caught a glimpse of that through Rawlings' tears? Had he sensed the truth in Rawlings' panic? Oh, shit. Just be cool. This was going to be the worst. If he could get through tonight, even the next 15 or 20 minutes, then he was sure he'd be able to handle it. He'd nearly vomited when he'd first gone in and seen Andrew lying there, his eyes covered with that black mask, his naked body half concealed by the sheet, and the river of blood that had flowed from his neck onto the bed and floor. "Sergeant?" Rawlings turned to see a young officer before him, her wiry brown hair cut short beneath her hat, her face sincere and plain. She was just about Rawlings' height, and she wore a gun belt with ease, but Rawlings had never seen her before. That didn't mean much, however, since the force had in the past few years expanded from slightly over 700 to just under 1,000 officers. There were tons of younger cops like this one. 70% of the force had less than 2 years' experience, and Rawlings wondered how long this woman had been at it. She was obviously into what was going on here tonight. There was no doubt about that, but that could simply stem from the fact that she'd been the first one on the scene. She'd been on patrol nearby, and dispatch had sent her over, finding the victim, DOA. She'd sealed the scene, called her supervisor, who in turn had called cars 1110 and 21, all exactly according to the book. Right, thought Rawlings, just follow procedure. You know how these things are supposed to go, just do it. Rawlings wiped his mouth, cleared his throat, and said, "I've checked with several different people in the building, and as far as anyone knows, the victim was the only one residing in the apartment." Rawlings knew that, of course, but he asked, "How about the mailbox in the lobby?" "Only one name on it." "Good. Anything else for now?" Rawlings looked down the hallway, saw his partner, Neil Foster, stepping out of the apartment and said, "Yeah, get 2 other officers and canvass the building. I want a complete list of the residents' names, and I want to know anyone's schedule who was here this afternoon and when, who was at work, and when they returned. Be sure and see if anyone heard anything or noticed anything, including anyone unusual in the past few days." "Yes, sir." His gut cinched tight. Rawlings proceeded down the Stark Hall. Overhead ran a series of pipes and wires, and he continued past a door labeled Boiler Room and met Foster halfway. Rawlings immediately felt the older man's eyes studying him, and Rawlings stopped, scratched his chin, and leaned against a wall. "Just be cool." You okay?" asked Foster. Just a year short of retirement, Foster had gray hair, a chubby body, a round face, and a smile that was reticent, reflecting, of course, the years and years of gore he'd seen as a homicide investigator. It was Foster who had plucked Rollins out of the juvenile division and brought him into homicide after they'd successfully worked a bridge case, that of a teenage murder. Foster was also the first person Rollins had come out to as a gay man, and perhaps he'd also be the first person on the force Rollins would come out to as being HIV positive. Rollins replied, "Yeah." When he first walked into that room down there, it was almost more than he could take. Speechless, Rollins had struggled not to hurry to Andrew's side and cry out. Foster, who knew him so very well, had sensed something like that, and of course, he'd seen Rollins' eyes redden and swell as he turned and darted out of the room, feeling a need to explain. Rollins now said, "I met him a few times, down at this gay center for teens. Todd and I gave a talk there. He was a good kid. He was interested in law enforcement, and I was helping him try to figure out some career stuff. It's just such a shock, that's all." "Sure." Foster, a sweet but gruff kid kind of guy, ran a hand over his mouth and looked judgmentally at Rollins. "You're going to be able to handle this one? It's not going to be a problem, is it?" It wasn't that unusual for a cop to know a murder victim. Over the course of his police career, Rollins himself had known roughly 10 men and women, mostly drug dealers, but others who'd been abused or been involved in previous crimes who'd ended up dead, one way or the other. So it wasn't a problem for a cop to investigate the death of someone he knew, unless, of course, there was a relationship, either platonic or romantic, and that's what Foster was asking here. That's what he wanted to know. Was this going to be a conflict of interest for Rollins? Rollins looked down at the floor and simply said, "No." "Good. Come on. I got the girl who found him." Relieved that he'd gotten over that hump, and certain that Foster would never bring it up again, Rollins followed his partner through the first door on the right and into the laundry room. Like everywhere down here, the concrete floors were painted a glossy battleship gray and the walls an old, dull white. The room itself was a large space, holding only an old table and chair, 2 deep sinks, 2 mustard-colored coin-operated washers, and 2 coin-operated dryers. On the outside wall were 3 high, narrow windows that peeked onto a walk alongside the building. Near one of the washing machines stood one tall cop, and next to him sat one distraught young woman. The officer, a big guy with dark goatee and a rather severe look on his face, had obviously been grabbed from the perimeter and now stood nearly motionless. The girls, somewhere in her 20s, sat on a ratty orange chair, her dark brown hair tumbling down and around her round face. Wearing ragged jeans, a baggy Carlton College sweatshirt, and only socks, she fiercely clutched a wad of tissues and stared down at the floor in shock. "Rollins," began Foster in a soft voice, trying to sound sensitive. "This is Kathy Dietrich. She lives in the building, and she's the one who found the body. Miss Dietrich, this is my partner, Sergeant Steve Rawlings. Together, we'll be investigating what happened here tonight. Thanks for talking to us." She slowly looked up at Rollins, her red but dry eyes studying him for an odd moment. A flash of panic zipped through Rollins. Did she recognize him? Had she seen him here in this very building? Her gaze then falling slowly to the floor, she said, "I've never seen a dead body before. Never," Rollins managed to say. "I'm sure it was a shock. My grandfather died last year, but I didn't see anything." Her bottom lip started to quiver. "It was a closed casket, you know?" It flashed through Rollins' head. "Girl, do you have any idea how lucky you are? Do you know how many I've seen?" And then he took note again of her sweatshirt. A Carlton grad. Okay. So she was probably smart. Probably from an upper middle class family. Relatively sheltered. This was probably her first apartment. Her first time living in the city. And her first real taste of tragedy. "Can you tell us," asked Foster, "why you came down to the apartment and what you found?" She looked at him, shrugged, and in a small voice said, "My sink backed up. I didn't have a plunger, so I came down to ask Andrew for one. I mean, he was the caretaker and everything, so..." So, about what time was this? Asked Rawlings. 8:20. You're sure? She nodded. My favorite show was on at 8:30, and I didn't want to miss it. So I glanced at my clock just before I came down. Rawlings continued, saying, So, you came down the front steps? Mm-hmm. The back ones. Did you see anyone else? No. Notice anything strange? I don't think so. Foster cut in, keeping his gravelly voice soft. And then I came down here. His door was open. You mean unlocked? No. I mean open, cracked open about 3 or 4 inches. I called out to him and knocked, and it just sort of stuck my head in. She put a hand to her mouth and started softly crying. He was there on the bed, and there was all that blood. Rollins said, Did you go in? No. I screamed and I ran back upstairs. I was scared that whoever did it was still in there or somewhere else in the basement. But you didn't see anyone, right? No, not at all. And then I ran straight up to my apartment and called 911. Rollins looked over at Foster, and they both intuitively knew it. This was as much as they were going to get out of her, here and now. Neil Foster raised his brow in silent question, and Rollins replied with a nod. On to the next phase. Posing it as a request when actually it was a necessity, Foster asked, Miss Teacher, would you mind coming down to the police station? We'd like to get a full statement from you. Her eyebrows pinching together in an anxious roof shape, she said, But I don't know anything else. It's just a technicality, that's all. Well, it would help us very much. Okay, sure. She wiped her nose. But I don't need, like, a lawyer or anything, do I? I mean, I didn't do anything. I'm not in trouble, am I? No, it's just standard procedure to get a statement from all witnesses. Oh, yeah, she mumbled as if she remembered seeing something like that on television. But can I go up to my apartment? I need to, get my shoes, and can I call my boyfriend and tell him where I'll be? Of course. Foster motioned to the tall cop, who had stood quietly this entire time. You go upstairs and make your call and get your stuff. And then Officer Sandvik here will take you downtown in a squad car. She nodded, wiped her nose, and then pushed herself to her feet. Rollins caught Sandvik's eye and gave him a nod, and the officer followed the young woman out. Once they disappeared, Rollins crossed the room and leaned against one of the beat-up washing machines. She doesn't seem to know much. No, but we'll just have to see what we can jog loose. Foster shrugged. She didn't mention the mask. Maybe she didn't notice it. Maybe she just saw the blood and... Yeah, probably. Foster thought for a moment, then said, Let's not release that to the media, that his eyes were covered. Good idea, replied Rollins, hoping to God there wouldn't be any copycat murders. From the looks of it, I mean from the way the blood is still pretty wet, I'd say this happened pretty recently. Maybe within the last 2 or 3 hours. Of course, we won't know for sure until the ME has his say. Now what? The B of I guys are in there going full tilt. Right, thought Rollins, scratching his chin. Technically, at this point, the B of I team and Foster and he were the only ones who were supposed to have access to the crime scene itself. Once all the forensic evidence had been gathered, once Rollins and Foster had completely gone over the scene, and then they'd called the medical examiner who'd removed the body for autopsy. Rollins said, It looks like the kid lived alone. You never know, replied Foster. We still need to get a search warrant. I mean, we don't want to lose anything. If they didn't, and there was something in there that belonged to someone else, say to a kid who had crashed there for a few days, that evidence would become inadmissible, no matter how valuable. Something like that had happened a year ago on a murder case when a rookie cop had discovered a gun in a closet and taken it without a warrant. It had turned out, in fact, to be the murder weapon, but because it belonged to the victim's sister, who also lived in the house, it was thrown out of court, and the sister, who had become the prime suspect, went free. You want to write up the warrant? Said Rollins, wondering how in the hell he was going to get back in there. With a shrug, Foster replied, "Sure. I got my computer out in the car. All I got to do is find a printer. You want to go downtown and take her statement?" Actually, can't we get someone from the dog watch to do that? We're going to have a shift carry over in a few minutes," he said, meaning that the next car, 11:10 rotation, was about to begin. "And I really don't want to leave here yet, not while this is so fresh." "Sure." An empty silence fell between them. They both knew what had to be done next, and they both knew it was the worst. Foster said, "What about the family? You want to do it?" I looked in his wallet and got his home address. "Listen." Okay, I'll do it. But you're going to owe me. Big time, too." Foster pushed himself to his feet. "You know what the best part about retirement's going to be? Not having to make these shitty calls. That's what. Not having to call up some mother or father or wife or husband in the middle of the night and say, 'Guess what? Your worst nightmare has just begun.'" "Thanks. I'll do the next call, I swear, and I'll take care of all the other ones tonight." Among other things, of course, he'd have to call dispatch and see if they had a record of any recent calls from this address. Then he'd have to run a CAPRS check and see if the computer-assisted police reporting system indicated the victim had any felonies or arrests. "I want a beer and a burr out of this one," said Foster. "You got it." They left the laundry room, Foster heading to his Crown Vic, parked somewhere in the mayhem outside, and Rollins started down the hall toward Andrew Lyman's apartment. Rollins figured he had an hour, plus or minus. It would take Foster that long to write up a warrant on his laptop, swing by one of the precinct stations, probably the 5th, to print it up, and then stop by an on-call judge who'd read and sign it, and that Rollins was sure would give him more than enough time. Technically, of course, he shouldn't look through anything, but a search warrant in a murder case was a foregone conclusion. No judge in his right mind would deny it. And who was going to quibble with a bit of time this way or that? You just got to do it. You just got to go back in there. Right. He simply had to get some distance, and then he had to walk back into that single-room basement apartment and not see some kid who was lost and looking, not some gorgeous farm boy whose young, firm body had pressed against his. No, he had to go back and look at a corpse. Andrew was gone. All that was left was the shell. This was work. And in the scope of things, Rollins had seen much worse, from decapitations to vivisections. Forcing himself down the hall, he took a deep breath and then turned into the room. This was the door, he told himself, that Kathy Dietrich had found ajar. She'd come down, found it cracked open, knocked once or twice, and perhaps the door had swung open. Looking into the room, just as she must have done, Rollins saw the body, the blood, but not the mask. No, Andrew's head was tilted back slightly, so she easily could have missed the thin black material covering Andrew's eyes. Ignoring the two people from the Bureau of Investigation coolly going in about the room doing their work, Rollins focused on the double mattress on the floor. The sheets were kicked this way and that, and the beautiful naked body, trim and muscular, once so active, now lay forever still. It was a perfect body. Rollins saw that now more than ever. The chest was big and broad, the nipples erect, with just a trace of youthful blondish hair around them. And that perfect waist was smooth and lean, again with just a hint of hair, leading up to and surrounding the navel. The arms were big too, not pumped up, not overblown, but firm and naturally muscular. Exactly, Andrew was no gym queen, vainly working biceps or triceps over and over again. There was no one muscular that had been overworked and swollen to the point of deformity. No, this boy's body was perfect, naturally so, because he'd grown up on a farm hauling bales of hay, shoveling seed, driving fence posts, and in that regard, Andrew had died at his physical peak. But the neck, once lean and powerful, now destroyed by a single powerful slash that cut deep into muscle and vein. And yes, blood, a great river of it that had burst from the body and spilled onto the bed as if onto a floodplain. Oh, Christ, thought Rawlins. What a handsome kid. He saw those small, firm lips, the very ones that had kissed his neck, and Rawlins felt his stomach swell and shrink. Just keep it professional, he told himself. Just pull back. Just look at the scene. What's going on here? There's one very dead young man lying in the middle of this room, and besides himself, there were two B of I guys circling the body. Only they weren't both guys like they usually were. One was a heavy man in gray polyester pants and a striped shirt, his hair gray, his face wrinkled. The other was a woman wearing dark slacks and a blue sweater, her long, thick hair just barely streaked with gray. He was putting a new filter into a small handheld vacuum cleaner, and she was holding a small video camera to her eye and obsessively taping every inch of that beautiful body, every fold of the sheet, and every drop of death. Slipping into professional mode, Rawlins stepped further into the room, crossed to their work kit, and grabbed a thin pair of latex gloves from a small cardboard box. He pulled them on and went to work. The acrid smell of death filled the room, both from the drying blood that was growing more thick and syrupy by the minute, as well as from the body's bowels, which had discharged. Rawlins stepped closer and saw that the apricot-colored sheets were darkened with a foul stain. The top sheet was pushed halfway between the navel and the crotch, and Rawlins lifted it up and peered in. Ignoring the fresh gust of fecal matter, he saw light brown pubic hair and a shrunken, lifeless, circumcised penis. He also saw exactly what he expected: a dried, milkish dab of semen on the tip of the penis and a glycerin-like shine on the shaft. As if to confirm it, Rawlins dropped the sheet and glanced to the left of the bed and saw a plastic bottle of lubrication and a crumpled white towel that had surely been used for cleanup. Could the perfect DNA samples be simply and easily found in those soft folds? Turning his attention to the slashed neck, he saw that the deepest part was in the center and then continued to the left, a thick cut that indicated the perpetrator was right-handed. The blood spilled down the neck and to the left as well, and then onto the mattress, some of it soaking in and a great lot of it flowing over and onto the floor in a puddle that was undisturbed by footprints or the slightest of smears. That alone indicated that the body hadn't been moved and that the victim had been killed, not simply in this apartment, but right here in this bed. Rawlins surmised there had been no struggle, that the attack had come as a total surprise. But why the mask? Turning his full attention to Andrew's face, Rawlins studied the thin black mask covering the eyes and held in place by an elastic band around the back of the head. A narrow thing, it resembled the infamous mask of Zorro. Except, of course, this one had no slits cut for the eyes. So it wasn't really a mask, but a blindfold. But why? The obvious reason was to prevent Andrew from seeing someone, and that someone was most surely either the last person he'd had sex with or the person who had killed him. More likely than not, it was one and the same, but perhaps not. In any case, the mask indicated why there'd been no struggle. Andrew literally hadn't seen what was coming. Oh, God. The poor kid, shaking his head. Rawlins turned away and rose to his feet. Andrew, Rawlins knew, had taken the job as caretaker to this and two neighboring apartment buildings, not because of the pay, which was nearly negligible, but because it included this cold one-room apartment. Actually, caretaker was a glorified title. Andrew's job wasn't to screen tenants and lease apartments, for that was done by the owner, who lived in a big ranch house in the suburb of Richfield. Rather, Andrew's job was to vacuum the hallways, empty the trash and common areas, such as the laundry rooms, rake the leaves outside, and shovel the walks front and back. all of which he gladly did in exchange for his own place, his first apartment, which was furnished with the abandoned goods of former residents. The slumpy mattress, the beat-up white dresser, the sagging couch, that broken coffee table. Where would Andrew have put it? Standing up, Rawlins looked around. There was this room, a closet in the corner, and an alcove that held a small kitchen with a built-in dinette table. Rawlins turned and headed straight to the dresser. As the B of I guy started vacuuming around the bed, sucking up any fiber, any air that he could into the small brown high-filter machine, Rawlins scanned the top of the dresser. Some change. A movie stub, a mostly burned candle, keys, a beat-up old nylon wallet, dark green with worn-out black stitching on the edges. No, realized Rawlins, Andrew wouldn't have kept it in the open, not just sitting here, right out here, for anyone to see. Looking carefully over his left shoulder, he saw that the woman, what was her name? Glass? Marcia Glass, maybe, had put down the video camera and picked up a 35mm camera, focusing her complete attention on the body. She was now shooting picture after picture of the slash on the victim's throat. A close-up from this angle, a broader shot from the right. Good, thought Rawlins, relieved not to be in the camera's view, for he couldn't by any means have this documented. There were 3 drawers to the old dresser, and the top one narrower than the bottom 2. Obviously, the piece of furniture had been painted a number of times, the latest coat being white, and he had to tug at the top drawer to get it open. As it revealed its contents, Rawlins' eyes were immediately caught by a photograph of a naked body, a muscular guy posed on a beach. His cock fully erect, reaching in, Rawlins did a quick check. Guessed there were, 3, maybe 4 porno mags. Tugging the drawer a little further, he saw a small stash of sex toys, including a handful of condoms, a chrome cock ring, and a pinkish latex butt plug. Ignoring the paraphernalia, Rawlins saw a handful of pencils and pens on the other side of the drawer, some paper clips, a rubber band, a checkbook, and a small spiral notebook with a red cover. A rush of relief surging through him, Rawlins reached for the notebook, then just as quickly caught himself. Glancing back, he is certain that neither Glass nor the guy was either watching or photographing him, but were both still focused on the corpse and its immediate environs. Knowing that he'd never have another chance, Rawlins lowered his hand into the drawer, cracked the small notebook, and saw the small, neat handwriting, page after page. Oh, Christ, it was all in here, wasn't it? Just like he'd said it was. And without another moment's hesitation, Rawlins shut Andrew's diary, carefully lifted it from the drawer, and slipped it into his coat pocket. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.